Hello, everyone. Welcome back to class. Hope you all are doing well today. We're going to start talking about Reconstruction as far as what it looked like for the people in the South and some of the people that were heading to the South from the North during Reconstruction. And then we're also going to talk about some of the political parts of Reconstruction, including leadership, presidents, things like that. So, first off, I want to talk about two groups of people. These two groups of people are scalawags and carpetbaggers. So I would write this down in your notes. Scalawags, these are Southerners who supported and helped with the process of Reconstruction. Now, remember, there is military occupation in the South. They are zoned into different areas. If you look at this map here, you can see that there's a zone for Virginia, the Carolinas, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, then another one for Mississippi and Arkansas, and then one for Texas and Louisiana. People who supported this and agreed with having military occupation were considered scalawags. They felt like these were Southerners who were not to be trusted. Now, another group of people that came down to the South from the North are people that we call carpetbaggers. Now, carpetbaggers, you see this guy down here, he's got the funny hat and glasses and a big bag on his back. The idea of a carpetbagger, that's someone who gathers all of their belongings into a big rug and carries it with them down to the South. Now, these carpetbaggers, a lot of these guys are what you would call con artists today. They would come down to the South. They would offer to help rebuild in whatever way that means. So, do I need to borrow money from a bank to help rebuild my farm? This guy is willing to loan me some money, and he would loan me money, but then he would require a very high interest rate when I pay it back. So, these carpetbaggers were not very trusted. Some of them offered to do certain work, certain jobs as like contractors, and they would schedule a job with a customer, someone in the South. They would offer to get it done. They would require some sort of down payment, and then they would take that money and run. And there's really no way to track these people. So these carpetbaggers, as they came to be known, were not very trusted by Southerners. And basically, their idea was to take advantage of Southerners financially, whatever that looked like. Okay. So scalawags, people from the South who supported and helped with the process of Reconstruction, then carpetbaggers, people trying to take advantage of Southerners. Okay. All right. Shifting gears here. We're going to talk about the next president. After we had Lincoln was shot, assassinated, Andrew Johnson takes over. He is not very well received. People don't really like him too much. One of the main reasons that the Republicans aren't too fond of him is the fact that he was not as strict on the South as they wanted him to be. Now, remember, Lincoln's plan to get the South back into the North was kind of the quick and easy 10% plan. Andrew Johnson's plan was not that much different from Lincoln's, but it still wasn't as strict as what the Republicans in Congress wanted. Now, eventually, they did have military occupation in the South, but Johnson was not in favor of things that supported this new group of people, these freedmen. He did not support the 14th Amendment. Eventually, they had to write the 14th and the 15th Amendment. Obviously, he wasn't a supporter of that either. But then along comes Ulysses S. Grant. Now, a lot of times we've seen this in history. Someone who is a great military leader sometimes gets appointed to be a political leader as well. This happened with George Washington. He did a great job. Unfortunately, with President Grant, he doesn't do as great of a job. In fact, he kind of uses the spoil system the same way that Andrew Jackson did, and he appointed some of his closest friends from the Army into his cabinet. And because of this, there were some issues that they decided on that were not in the best interest of the people of the United States. Some of these people weren't very honest. In fact, some of them were bankers who were taking bribes from other people and giving out loans to people that did not deserve it, or weren't able to pay it back. So these guys made some terrible decisions, and it led to a financial crisis in the country. So the Panic of 1873 is where there were several banks that closed. Um, there were the stock market was suffering because people weren't able to trade as easily. And the reason people weren't able to trade as easily because one of the biggest industries of the time that's growing, the railroads, are shutting down. These railroad companies, 89 different companies that use the railroads, went broke. And this doesn't just hurt the railroad companies, it hurts their customers, the people who rely on them to send goods across the country or to receive goods from another part of the country. So, with these railroads going broke, farmers are going broke, factories are going broke. By this time in 1873, there were more than 18,000 companies that had closed down due to this panic. And as with politics, even today, when there's a problem in the country, a lot of people like to say, thanks a lot, whoever's in office. And in this case, thanks a lot, President Grant, who's a Republican. Let's blame him for all the problems. Not necessarily the other people that made these problems, but let's blame Grant, and let's just go ahead and switch to the other party. Okay. So sometimes when we see a rough patch in our economy, especially with the economy, but sometimes we see a rough patch in the economy or social issues, we will see a flip flop. We'll see people turn from one party to the next. And this happens quite often. So a lot of people are blaming Republicans for this crisis, and they started electing Democrats into Congress. Now, at this time, we have to remember a lot of the Democrats who are from the South are going to be supporters of slavery. Now, slavery is obviously over. The 13th Amendment has passed. We're not getting slavery back, but these people have that same sentiment, and they have this same idea on how these people should be treated. Okay. So in this election, we have two main people running. We've got Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. Now, the Republican candidate is Hayes, and he is neither one of them really have a favorite, or are the favorite to either side. And the votes are pretty well split between the North and the South, and it's not so much of an even split between North and South like it was with Lincoln. So supporters of the abolition movement and then supporters of slavery. So this is a very different race than what we've seen in the last 15, 20 years before this. But this race was so close that they ended up having to create a commission that would figure out who is going to be president. And it went to the House, and they came up with a compromise. So write this down in your notes. The Compromise of 1877. A group of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats met together and agreed to elect Rutherford B. Hayes under the following conditions. First off, Republicans are going to be forced to remove all federal troops from the South. People from the South were saying that the reason that things are bad down there is because people are angry about northern troops being in the South. The Civil War is over. Nobody's fighting, but that pressure of having the military occupation is not comfortable. So Republicans are going to have to remove the federal troops from the South. Number 2, they have to agree to provide land grants and loans for railroad construction. In order to get the economy back on track, no pun intended, we got to get the tracks going. We've got to get the railroads back into business, because if they're not working, people can't ship their goods back and forth. We can't trade between the North and the South, and all of our industries are going to suffer for this. So we need to invest some money and loan out some money from the government to these railroad companies and to these businesses that rely on this transportation. Okay. And then also, they're going to have to allow at least one Democrat into Hayes' cabinet. So normally the president is going to choose who his cabinet members are. He is being forced to choose at least one Democrat. Now, the Democrats, their side of the agreement, what they agreed to do we're going to go ahead and respect those civil rights. We're going to go ahead and respect these African Americans. Come on. The Civil War just ended 12 years ago. Do you really think that they're going to treat them that much differently? No, they're not. Okay. So they agreed to respect these rights, and they do follow them to an extent. But the real deal is they are not being treated fairly. They are not being treated equally. There will still be mistreatment, and a lot of the Democrats are going to allow certain things to happen in the South. And part of what they allow, move this out of the way here. By the way, this is Mr. Hayes right here, Rutherford B. Hayes. Um, it says when he was elected president, he withdrew federal troops from the South, ending Reconstruction. So officially, the political part is over. Reconstruction is over when it comes to military occupation, making sure that no one owns slaves anymore, and it's over with. Okay, for the most part. Now, when we're talking about Reconstruction, in this case, we're talking about the political side of it, the states rejoining the Union. We're not talking about the physical reconstruction of the South. That's still taking time. That's going to take many years before the South is back to business the way it was before. And in fact, because of the idea of the New South, y'all remember that from yesterday, the New South is allowing for more industry to be created in the South. Okay. So the South, people in the South quickly returned to mistreating freedmen, and they even created what we call Jim Crow laws. Now, we talked about the Black Codes recently, and Black Codes were laws that were passed that prevent African Americans from receiving equal treatment. Well, the 14th Amendment was a response to those Black Codes. Now, the Jim Crow laws, these are a little bit different than Black Codes. They don't take away specific rights from these people, but they do change the way that those rights are received. So, for example, public things, public education, public institutions, we are going to see a split between whites and blacks. They said that there are certain things reserved for white people, and there must be a separate but equal thing for colored people, whatever it is. So if you're going to have a public restroom, you can have a whites only restroom and a separate but equal colored restroom. Okay, so this separation, the idea here is we're going to keep these two groups of people apart so there's no conflict. We've seen us try to do this in the past with the Native Americans. We don't get along, so we push them to the side. Now, with the Indians, we were able to push them further and further away, off of their land. In this case, we're still living side by side. We're still working side by side, but we're going to have separate facilities for these people. So there's no way to move these African Americans out of these areas legally. So the way they do that is creating separation. Okay. And these are Jim Crow laws. So make sure you have that written down. Jim Crow laws segregated freedmen from the rest of society. These are just some of the examples here of what there could be for whites and coloreds. So they had different restrooms, different drinking fountains, and different schools. And we don't see the integration or reintegration of blacks and whites for another 50, 60 years from here. Actually, there's about 70 years. But I want to show you an example here. Okay, so if you look up here at the top, you see these two water fountains. Okay, this one is for coloreds and this one is for whites. Now, are they separate? Yes. Do they both provide water? Yes. Now, the difference, I don't know if you know much about water fountains. This water fountain right here, this water comes straight from the water source. Okay, clean water coming from a clean water source comes right out of this spigot. This one, I don't know if you can see this box here, but when there's a box around a water fountain like this, that's a refrigeration unit. That makes that water come out nice and cold and filtered. Is this really equal? No, it's not. So separate but equal, eventually, you're going to see this later. Eventually, separate but equal is not truly equal. Okay. With the schools, public school system, the schools that were reserved for coloreds were not always air conditioned or had heating or even had desks sometimes. Maybe they didn't have all the books that the other schools had. So, separate but equal eventually is going to be deemed unconstitutional. So, keep a lookout for that later. Okay. So that's Jim Crow laws. This is how the South is changing. And like I said, it takes about 60 years before we start to see progress to integrating these two races together. Um, and you'll learn more about that when you get into 11th grade and when you're talking about um, the reintegration of blacks and whites in the early 1900s and what that looks like. Okay. Tomorrow will be our last day's worth of notes. They should not take us too long. They'll be shorter than these notes. It's about some different acts that were passed to help kind of stimulate the economy, stimulate the people at the time, and make our world kind of similar to what we see today. So we're seeing progress in certain areas, and other areas we're seeing a little bit of regression here. Okay. So, anyways, I hope y'all have a great day. Don't forget to wash your hands, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.